Okay. Good morning, Dr. Tevin. Dr. Tevin, Doc. Mhm. Dr. Tevin. Okay. In the meantime, good morning to all participants in today's session. Before we can begin, I would like with the indication of thumbs up if I am clearly audible. So if you could please indicate with thumbs up if I am audible and if you can hear me. Thank you. My name is Aryan Pillai, and I am part of the Research Capacity Development Unit at the Postgraduate School, and I will be your moderator for today. Now, before we begin today's session, I have a few housekeeping rules that I would like to read out before we can begin. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to speak or type your question in the chat box. I will make sure to notify the presenter to address it. This session is being recorded. Both the recording and the presentation slides will be uploaded to our Moodle communities. Also, the recording will be uploaded on our CDMS and our YouTube channel. A feedback survey will be sent during the session in the chat box. We would like to request that you fill this out for us to gain insight into whether this workshop was useful and how we can improve in the future, as well as providing feedback to the facilitator for their hard work. Now, today's session is titled Introduction to Encryption Techniques to Safeguard Your Research Data from Loss or Unauthorized Access. Our facilitator for today's section is Dr. Tevin Moodley. If you could please allow me to read his bio to you. Dr. Tevin Moodley is a senior lecturer, researcher, and cybersecurity specialist with expertise in computer vision, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and data protection. He's the director of the Center for Cybersecurity and has extensive experience presenting workshops and lectures on information security, encryption, and awareness with real-world research and industry applications. Dr. Tevin, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you, Doc.
Fantastic.
Before we begin, I would like to ask you, Doc, if you would prefer to take questions during or after your presentation.
At any point. So if somebody has a question, please just shout out. I'll happily answer it at any point.
Okay. Thank you so much, Doc, for taking your time out of your busy schedule to do this. And the floor is yours.
Perfect. So apologies about earlier. I just had some network issues. I'm going to share my screen now. Just let me know when it's visible.
We can see your screen, Doc.
Fantastic. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. But started as a very joint when I was off to
Doc, I think there's a problem with your internet connection because you cutting out as you are speaking. Dr. Tevin, can you hear me? We are currently unable to hear
okay, I'm
you.
back. Sorry. Yeah,
Okay,
I'm
no
back now. So
problem.
I can hear me now. Yeah. I've just
Yes, Doc.
connected to my personal hotspots. My office is unfortunately not the best with network. Okay, so apologies about that. We should be smooth sailing from this point on. So as I was mentioning before, I was disconnected there is when I was asked to give this presentation, I wondered about what postgraduate students would benefit from the most. And myself having recently finished my PhD, I think I can emphasize and I can sympathize a lot with the postgraduate students, and I can understand the trials and tribulations that one needs to go through in order to complete their whether it's an honors degree, whether it's a master's degree, whether it's a PhD, and what that entails. So I thought about, one of the things that we as researchers often neglect and don't actually understand is how do we actually protect our research data, and what is the value of that research data right now? In this room, I mean, a lot of us are standing here with lots of research data that is available. And the key message here is that we need to understand the value of our research data, how sensitive that data is, and how do we go about protecting it. So as introduced, my name is Tevin Mudley. I am a senior lecturer as well as the director for the Center for Cybersecurity at the Academy of Computer Science and Software Engineering. And today I'm going to be presenting on how do we protect our research data using modern encryption techniques. So specifically what we'll look at today is why research data matters. We'll also understand what are the different types of encryption that we have. How can we look at it from a practical aspect in terms of the tools and resources that we can use? I will try and show you a few live demonstrations, and then we'll look at best common practices. So first and foremost, what makes research valuable? I think this is a key question that a lot of us will ask ourselves and a lot of us will try and understand. What makes this key research valuable is first and foremost, research data often has significant academic, it also can be financial or reputational value. Whatever research field that you are in, whether it's IT, whether it's in geology, whether it's in GEMS, whether it's in engineering, there's lots of different research data that's out there. And part of our research studies these days contain data. It's very rare that you will see a research master's or thesis that actually exists without some type of research data collection or research data storage. So we need to understand what that means. So there could be multiple things. I mean, I want you, as you're sitting here, listen to this, just try and see if one of these apply to you. So first and foremost, researchers will store information such as, sensitive participant information. Those of you who collect participant information would store that. A lot of you will have unpublished findings. So a lot of you would have like research papers in the works that you haven't published yet. A lot of you would also have grant applications. In some cases, you'll have things like intellectual property. And what you need to understand is there are attackers that exist in the space of cybersecurity that know this, right? For example, if your laptop was stolen containing participant data, this could create some type of legal or ethical or reputational problems, so not just from yourself, but from the university standpoint, we need to understand the seriousness or the reputation of that data getting stolen, right? So you need to understand that researchers are not immune to cybersecurity. That's threats, you might think that your research is not important, but that's not the case. And we need to understand what are the different types of sensitive research data that exist out there. So as I mentioned, many of us or many researchers would assume that sensitive data only means medical resources. I think very importantly, ladies and gentlemen, that is not the case in today's age, right? If you look at the vast amounts of data that exist purely from a personal level, it is actually a very scary sight. If you want to look at yourself, for example, how much data exists of you out there? If you had to go Google your name, what information would exist, right? I mean, while you're sitting here, just go do a quick Google on your name or Google search on your name and see what information exists out there. There's a lot of information. Now, what you classify as sensitive is very subjective. I understand that and I can acknowledge that. But sensitive data exists in almost every discipline that we have, right? For example, you would have something like patient or participant information. This could be things like medical histories. This could include things like clinical trials, laboratory results, if anything that you would be considered participant type or medical type information. You also have genomics or biological data. And this would be, so this is general what Monarch speaks about. Even if names are removed, DNA information can sometimes identify some types of individuals. Then we also have things like interview recordings and transcriptions. Now, a lot of you will say to me, well, Dr. Willie, we don't necessarily collect information about the participants themselves. We might ask them, where did you grow up? Or, if you're doing a clinical trial on food, you might ask them about things about what food they collect and what kind of plants or vegetation they grow. We're not collecting any personal information. That's not the case. In today's age this goes back to the first point, with the amount of data points that can exist on one individual, it's very easy for you to identify someone. So, for example, if I tell you that I've got a PhD, there's a participant that has a PhD at UJ in computer vision. He is Indian of ethnicity. He is around 30 to 35 years old, and he does his research in sports, for example. You would easily be able to identify who that person is in the University of Johannesburg. Correct? And this is the point I'm making, that identifiable information does not mean that you need to have just an ID number or a name or a surname. You can identify somebody through other means. So interview recordings and transcriptions, I've seen a big uptake, especially from an ethical standpoint, because I serve as part of the ethics committee, and we've seen a big uptake in the interviews and recordings, and it's very important that we understand what that actually relates to. Then, of course, you have things like grant proposals and unpublished papers, which I've already mentioned. And what these things will often contain is your very novel ideas. What are your future research going to look like? What are your different types of funding strategy that you maybe use? And losing this can be very costly to your research and to your future researchers. Then, of course, we have students, records, and institutional data. Things like marking, assessments. Those of you who are in the academia space that are lecturing, you have student records, you have access to marks. That information that you may want to take later to some type of publishable works, that is example of sensitive data. So I'm going to ask questions, and a lot of these questions, I won't see the answers to them because of the type of forum that we're in here. But, if I had to ask you this question in terms of what data would cause the biggest problem, and for example, if that data appeared on social media tomorrow, would it be a problem? And if you think that's going to be a problem, that usually is the data that needs the most protection. So, for example, if you look at your research data and you ask yourself, if my data had to appear on social media tomorrow, or it was stolen and leaked, would it be a problem? And if the answer is yes, then you are in need of the most kind of protection. And I like to think about it in a way of analogy of a house, right? It's like this. In your house, a lot of us will have different types of items. We'll have TVs, we'll have cell phones. Now, not every item in your house has the same value. I think we can all agree on that, right? A dishcloth might not be of the same value as a TV, for example, right? You might not care about the fact that somebody sees your kitchen table, but if somebody had to take your passport or accesses your passport, or bank statements, for example, that will be a problem. And research data is very similar in this manner, where different information requires different level of protection. For example, you wouldn't put your passport and leave it out on the kitchen table, right? You would keep that in a safe. So the idea here is, if disclosure would create some type of harm, whether that's embarrassment or some type of legal problems or even financial loss, it probably deserves that type of protection. Now, with that in mind, we need to understand and look at the real world risks, ladies and gentlemen, of what could potentially happen. So when you hear the word cybersecurity attack, what comes to your mind? If I had to ask this question, if I had to say cybersecurity attack, what comes to your mind? A lot of you will think sophisticated hackers, right? People that are sitting in very dark, isolated rooms, who have a terminal opened up and are typing away frantically trying to break into your system, correct? A lot of us would think about some type of hackers that are very complex, and they plug a USB into your device and they try and go through the back wall, a firewall, and they try and infiltrate your system. A lot of us will think that, and for the most part, that is not incorrect. In some cases, it does happen, but in reality, it's often much more simple. In reality, cybersecurity or real world attacks are a lot more simplistic than a lot of what we're made to believe it is, right? Now, the real understanding here is that most data breaches occur because of some type of basic mistake, right? And it's not because of some type of genius hacker. So, for example, we have what we can call laptop theft. I think this is one of the things that a lot of us are prone to, walk into your car or walk into your residency or wherever you study in your place of work. It's very easy for your laptop to be stolen. Now, a lot of the time when you are in your research space, often a lot of people will travel to go conduct questionnaires. You guys will travel to go collect data samples. Whatever the case may be, your researchers travel a lot. And with that, laptops get stolen and cars get broken into. We will address how do we prevent these things in a bit, but we need to understand that laptop theft occurs, right? They also have what we call accidental cloud sharing, where you may be in a position that you share a link with somebody to your cloud storage, wherever your data is stored. And you, instead of saying share only with this participant, you share to everybody. That in turn could create very weak types of, or that can create some types of attacks. You also have things like weak passwords, where this is still one of the biggest problems today, right? And we'll talk about this a bit more, but attackers 9 times out of 10 don't really hack a system. They simply log in using your stolen credential. They find ways to steal these credentials and they log into it. And we'll talk about how they go about this. We also have malware and ransom, which is probably one of the biggest one, where a malware or ransom attempts to hijack your system, and then it holds your information ransom so that you cannot access it. And then what these attackers will do is they will demand money in order for you to get your files back. And then another one that I see often is lost USB drives, right? USB drives are very small. They're very easy to lose. I think many of us sitting here can understand, or we can count probably on a one or two hands how many USB devices we've lost, which is quite a few. So the biggest cybersecurity incidents, that I've investigated rarely involve someone breaking through a firewall, right? They often usually start, ladies and gentlemen, with what we call the human mistake, right? The human mistake, whether that means you leave your car unlocked, whether that means you share the incorrect link, whether that means you use weak passwords. The human mistake is often what is the first line of attack. Now, it's kind of like this, right? Imagine you spending thousands of rands installing security gates, you have alarms, you have cameras all around your house. But it doesn't help, ladies and gentlemen, if you leave the front door open, And that is essentially what happens when researchers use weak passwords or they fail to encrypt their data. UJ could have the most sophisticated firewall system, and your data sits on their server. But if you then have that locally stored on your machine and it's not encrypted with some type of BitLocker, then you're leaving yourself very vulnerable. And that in itself is a danger. So with that said, let's look at what is encryption. So we know that we need this encryption, and we know that these different types of attacks exist. So the key talking point here now, ladies and gentlemen, is what exactly is encryption? Now, I want to give you an example. Imagine I give everybody in this room a printed copy of my research proposal. Some of you who are doing research proposals at the time, imagine that you get a printed copy of the research proposal. Now, I assume that everybody would be able to read that. You'd be able to read that information, interpret it. Now, imagine I take that very same proposal and I convert it into a language that you don't understand, right? Whatever language that may be. Maybe it's Dutch, maybe it's Afrikaans, maybe it's German, whatever language that may be, you don't understand that. So my question to you is, first and foremost, would the information still be there? And the answer is yes, right? Just because I converted it into a different language doesn't mean that it's disappeared. The information still exists. But the next question is, would you be able to understand that information? And the answer will often be no, because you don't read that language. So this is what essentially encryption is. It's encryption converts this readable data into what we call unreadable ciphertext. It's just a bunch of random numbers that we cannot understand. And only authorized users with the correct key, which we'll talk about in a minute, can decrypt that information. So many people will think about encryption as hiding information, and it's not the case. We don't necessarily hide information. It's all about transforming information into some type of format that cannot be understood without some type of key, right? So the data file will still exist. The file will still exist. The information is still stored, but it becomes meaningless to anyone who's not authorized to view it. So the core idea here of encryption is that encryption takes something that is readable, ladies and gentlemen, and transforms that into something that is unreadable. And we have what we call, plain text and ciphertext, which I'll talk about in a second. So what is plain text and what is ciphertext? Now, if I showed you this word over here, my secret text, all of us can read that and to the point, right? That is what we refer to as plain text. But if I give you this word, JVPBZO, I mean, none of us will understand. That is just like random junk, right? Random garbage, doesn't matter what it looks like. None of us reading the ciphertext will actually understand what this means, right? So plain text, very simply, is information that we can understand. Ciphertext is ciphertext in this specific sense is information that we cannot understand. So plain text will be things like your emails, your Excel research, your files, your research proposals, sometimes, in some cases, your interview, your transcripts, where your ciphertext is just that information that is encrypted. To humans, it appears random. To computers, it appears meaningless without the key. So even the computer doesn't understand it if it doesn't have that specific key. So generally what will happen is we will take some type of plain text. We will then use some type of encryption key to encrypt that plain text into what we call ciphertext, right? And then if we want to decrypt it back into the plain text, we would need that key to do it as well. So I've mentioned this key many times, and it's very important that we talk about this key, and we'll talk about it in just a second. But I want to give you the idea of why this is very important, why plain text and ciphertext is very important. Now, suppose somebody steals your external hard drive. So say, for example, you have all your research that is sitting on some type of external hard drive, and say somebody then steals that external hard drive. What then would specifically happen, right? They would then connect to it using their computer. Instead of seeing, some type of document called research proposal docs, they will effectively see some type of gibberish. The information is still there, it exists, but it's inaccessible. And that's a great thing behind this encryption point. And, encryption goes back decades, right? I mean, in the ancient Egyptians used to use encryption techniques to kind of hide hidden messages to specific pharaohs, right? They use hieroglyphics to do this. There's a case would be called the Bamington scandal, where the Queen Elizabeth, actually, there was this whole conspiracy to kill her, right? To murder her because there was a regime that was against her. So what they did is they had this cipher that they used to use to communicate this regime. And Queen Elizabeth hired I call it informant or whatever the case is, to crack the cipher. So the point that I'm trying to make here is these techniques have been used for centuries, right? It's been used for a very, very long time. Now, a common mistake that people will often assume that encryption means deleting information, and it doesn't, right? This is the point that I want to make here. The information is still there. It's just about how do we access that information. So to make all of this, we need something very, very important. And I think I've mentioned that, and that is the specifically encryption key. Before we get there, there's just some other terms that I want you to know. So we've already talked about plain text. We've talked about ciphertext. What is this encryption key? And just at a high level view, this encryption key is a secret value that is used to what we say would lock or unlock some type of information. Now, this is one of the most important concepts in cybersecurity. Now, a passphrase is a human readable password that protects or generates this key. So, I don't have much space to draw here, and I'm not a very good drawer, but, say, for example, you have some type of message. You would then have a key, and this key would then transform that message into some type of gibberish on the other side, right? So you would have a case where you have some type of random words over here, and over here you would have some type of legitimate type of letters, right? And the whole idea is this key over here, ladies and gentlemen, is what locks or unlocks it. Similar to a door, right? In order for us to open a door, we have to lock it. In order for us to close that door so we hide that information, we have to lock it, right? And to access it, we have to unlock it. Now, the important thing here is, how do I keep that key safe? And that concept can be applied with a passphrase. A passphrase is what we'll call some type of human readable password that essentially protects this key or protects or generates the specific key. Now, think about a password as protecting the key in a safe. So say, for example, you have a key that unlocks doors in your house. You put this key in a safe, and that is specifically the passphrase. That's what it's used. The next kind of concept that you need to understand is what we call the cipher or the algorithm. And this is just some type of mathematical process. So for those mathematicians that are in the session today, this is where, we would use your math to process or to perform the encryption technique. Now, the more complicated the algorithm, the more secure the encryption mechanism will be, because just because something's encrypted doesn't mean it's safe, and we'll talk about that towards the end of the presentation. But it's very important to understand that. Now, there are different types of ciphers and algorithms. We have things like asymmetric, we have RSA. You don't need to understand the maths today. You simply need to know that this cipher basically performs the lock-in and the unlocking. So as I said, say we had this research proposal over here. The cipher would generate the encryption, right? The cipher is the lock. The key is the physical key, and the passphrase protects that key. And then the encrypted key, or the encrypted file will become that ciphered text. Now, if we go back to our house analogy, the house contains this valuable information, right? The lock is what protects the access, so that will be the cipher. The lock is actually what is protecting our stuff, and that is the cipher. The key will open that lock, right? So this key will open that lock. The passphrase is what's protecting the key. So maybe you have like a lockbox outside the house that's protecting it, and each of these components will serve its different purpose in order for us to perform encryption. Okay. All right. So just to go back to what this key is, and as I mentioned, I think, we've kind of get this key, we kind of get the concept of this, but the key is just a random string of bits, or we call it alphanumeric characters, that is used to scramble and unscramble data. And when this is paired with an encryption algorithm, so that math formula, the key locks the data into that unreadable text, right? And then obviously unlocks it back. So we get two types of things. We get what we call, encryption, where we lock something, and get what we call decryption, where we unlock something. And those are very, very important facts to know. I am monitoring the chat. So one of the questions is, what happens if you lose that key? Well, that's a very good question, right? If that key is lost, then you can't actually unlock that data. So it's kind of like this: if you lock if you have a door that's locked and you lose that key to that door, then effectively you don't have access to that door anymore. What access into that room? So losing the key is a big problem, and this is why where we store the key is very, very important. So when you create keys, I mean, there's a I don't have time today to show you a tool called Cleopatra, but Cleopatra is what we use for digital certificates, and we can actually create keys with them. But that key gets stored internally on a Windows machine. And now, yes, technically, anybody can access the key, right? So if your key is stored on your machine, somebody will say, but if somebody steals my laptop, then they have access to my key. Yes, they do. But without the passphrase, then they can't have access. So the whole point is that passphrase will keep that key very secure. So the key is stored on the laptop. Unless you delete it, it should stay there forever. But the thing that keeps the key then safe is that passphrase. Thank you for that question. Very relevant question. So I wanted to do a little bit of an exercise just to show you the power of a key and what this means, right? So we have this word. Let me just get my laser. So we have this word, SLLSUC, SLVOF, and this is what we call a substitution cipher, specifically CISA cipher. Now, how many of you were able to decrypt this? Or, another word you can use is hack this. I don't know if I can't see the reactions, but show of hands if you think you'll be able to do it. You might be able to do it. It will take a bit of time, correct? But for now, what it looks like is pure garbage, pure junk. I don't know what this thing means. And this is often how encrypted data looks, right? It looks like this garbage that we aren't able to unpack. Now, if I change the narrative a bit and I said, here's a key, and then you say, okay, well, a key means that for every time I see the letter S, it actually represents an A. Every time I see the letter L, if you go to the L, it represents a T. So if you look at this now, ladies and gentlemen, you are actually able to determine or able to decrypt this information. So if we decrypt this, it will translate to attack at dawn at the Northern Bridge. And this is how in World War II, I forget the name of the machine now, but they used to use these machines to actually send encoded messages about how they would attack some type of army. So can you guys see the benefit of the key? The key holds it all. If I had to give you these types of questions, or if I had to give you these types of messages without the key, it means nothing. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is in a nutshell, encryption technique and what the value of the key. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but two very important key terms that we have is what we call symmetric encryption and asymmetric encryption. Now, the whole crux of this, what this means is symmetric encryption is where we have one key, right? That the same key unlocks and unlocks that. And what's nice about symmetric encryption is that it's very, what's the word? Simple, fast, and efficient. Then we have asymmetric encryption, where we have two keys. We have what we call a public key and a private key. And what's nice about this is one will lock and one will unlock. So often when we have emails, for example, we'll have a party that has a public key and a private key, and then that public key is able to lock something, and then you use a private key to unlock it. And I don't want to get into it because I don't want to spend too much time speaking about cybersecurity and all of that. But in cybersecurity, we have the SEER triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And keys allow us to keep that foundational triad, right? So symmetric encryption, just think about it, these are just different types of encryption. And we also have end-to-end encryption, which is similar to asymmetric encryption. And that is what WhatsApp would use, right? The end-to-end encryption, so that only you two that are sending messages, I don't want to get into the semantics of it, whether we think WhatsApp is actually doing end-to-end encryption or not, but they're supposed to be doing it. But what that means that only the person sending the message and the person receiving the message have access to that message. Nobody else theoretically should have access to it, because we have these keys that allow people to historically access this type of information. So the next thing I want to unpack, ladies and gentlemen, is what are passwords, and what does passwords mean versus encryption? Now, how many of you think a password and encryption are the same thing? How many of us think here that a password and encryption relate to the same thing? And the reality of it is that a surprisingly large number of people do think this, right? People think that passwords and encryption are the same thing, but inherently, yes, passwords and encryptions are related, but they perform completely different functions, ladies and gentlemen. The core idea is that passwords will control access, right? It answers the questions of are you allowed to enter? Where encryption protects the actual information. It answers the question of, if someone gets inside, can they read the data, right? So, if you think about this as a university building, like, we all come to campus every day, the security guard at the entrance checks your access card, where you tap it, that checks your access card, and then the password would be effectively your fingerprint, right? So the access card is the authentication, and that is basically essentially what the password will perform. Now, both are very important. Where passwords, strong passwords will remain essential. People ask me, do you think passwords are going to be a thing of the past? No, I think passwords will be here forever. The way passwords work might change, but I do think to some level, passwords will always be a thing. Now, the next thing that we have to understand is, unfortunately, even the strongest technology has its weaknesses. And I mentioned this at the beginning. What is the biggest weakness? And the biggest weakness, ladies and gentlemen, is what? People, right? As I said, what do you think is the weakest part of most cybersecurity systems? And most people think it's software. Most people think it's hackers or viruses, even the technology. But the answer is usually people. I'm not saying in every instance it's people. Yes, there are things out there, but in most cases, it's people is what relates to this. So we often imagine that the cyber attacks are very highly sophisticated, but in reality, they're quite simple. And it's the ability for attackers to manipulate people. Because it's easier for attackers to manipulate people than it is for them to manipulate computers. You can spend, as I mentioned, millions on the best security software, but it only takes a person clicking a link once, and the entire system can be compromised, right? So what is the human problem? One of the first things that we have is, we'll come back to social engineering, but second on passwords is weak passwords. How many of us use the same password across multiple different websites? I'm pretty sure 90% of us here are doing that, right? And 90% of us over here, myself included to a certain level, we do use it. And it comes to this thing about convenience versus security. What level of convenience do you want? Are you able to forego for this convenience perspective, right? But going back to the point, a lot of us use the same password. A lot of people use, I can guarantee out of 60% of you sitting here, you use a birth date, you use a name of somebody that you are close to, that you like. Maybe you dislike them, I don't know. But you use some type of family relative name, whether it's a kid, whether it's a sibling, whether it's a pet. A lot of you have it. And in combination with that, you'll have some type of number, whether it's a birth date, whether it's a current year, and you'll use some type of special character. Am I right? Do a lot of us use that? You can either be nodding your heads or shaking your heads. If you say no, then good for you. But if you're saying yes, then that's a problem, right? So weak passwords are a problem. And all it takes is someone to compromise one weak password. And we will visit a tool later that shows you, how weak is the specific password. We'll visit some of these online tools. So make sure that your passwords aren't weak. How do we make sure that these things aren't weak? We're going to talk about the different types of tools we can use. So going back to weak passwords, password reuse. This is the biggest risk because one of the websites I'm going to show you is Have I Been Pwned, where you can look if your information's been compromised. And if your information's been compromised where your password's been compromised, you can effectively be compromised from an attacking's point of view across every other website that you share their password. So the rule of thumb, I say, if it's a password that you use generically for, websites, that's not that important. That's okay if it's one or two websites. But the moment you use it for anything like your Gmail or OneDrive or university account, that's a problem. I've seen this a lot in terms of researchers sharing credentials. Now, why do we do this as a researcher? Well, you do it because, your lab partner needs access to a system, and only you have access, and the UJ unfortunately does have some hurdles that we have to jump through in order to get information. But we see a lot of postgraduate students sharing information, right? A lot of you would say, oh, here's my password and my username, you can get into it. No big problem. We're sharing lab accounts, we're sharing cloud storage accounts. The problem is accountability. If it goes wrong, whose fault was it? I understand that resources need to be shared, but if now that data is compromised and your principal supervisor says who's to blame here, who are you going to blame, ladies and gentlemen? That's fundamentally one of the biggest problems with sharing credentials. There's no accountability. The other one is writing passwords down. I think some of us still do this where we write it down somewhere. It's easy to be stolen. And then social engineering and phishing is a big problem, where the biggest problem with humans, and I know this is going to sound very much like an IT person's point of view, is that we have too many emotions. And what does that mean if I say the biggest problem is that humans share too many emotions? That means that your emotions can be played upon, right? Where somebody will figure out, maybe they do some research on you. They find out somebody's sick in your family, you need a lot of money, and if you don't have that money soon, this family member's in trouble. I'd say, hypothetically speaking, touch wood, that never happens, but hypothetically speaking, that is the situation you find yourself in. Now, if somebody knows that, they can use that to manipulate you. They can say, listen, we know you have all this medical information. Just share the data with us, and we will give you 10,000 Rand so that you can pay for this treatment of your family member. How many of you would do it? And it's a difficult question, but that's ultimately what social engineering is. People playing on the emotions, people being able to understand, if you get an email that looks like it's from your supervisor to say, you better submit all your research data to me now, there's an emergency and we're at risk of losing everything. How many of you would panic and just send that to your supervisor because you think you're in the situation where you have to send it to them? Right? So social engineering and phishing attacks are very big, and we have to be cognizant of those different types of attacks. All right. So moving on. So what can we do to kind of prevent these things? First and foremost, we can have password managers. So what is a password manager? A password manager is basically, think about it as a safe. You have a safe, and inside of the safe, you have, I don't know, you have your different types of documents that are stored there. How do you access the safe? You access the safe with one key, right? So password manager is the same concept. You have this vault, and inside of this vault, you have different types of passwords. You have the account, the website, you have the username, and you have the password. Now, this vault allows you to easily not have to remember information. The idea is that you only have to remember one password. We call this the master password, and this password would probably be, for my example, I use LastPass. Well, not as much anymore because of all the attacks they've gone under recently, but LastPass. And how this would basically work is you'll have 30 or 40 websites that are stored in that, and inside of those websites, you would basically have access to this one password. Another one that I haven't listed here is Google Manager, right? Google Manager, Password Manager. All of us use that today. If you just go onto Google Chrome and you go Password Manager, that is essentially what a password manager is. Google, the idea is you should get these password managers to generate the passwords for you. And if we have time at the end of the session, I will try and show you, what password generators look like, because the benefit of that is you don't have to remember it. You only have to remember the one password. So some of these tools that exist are LastPass, Bitwarden, 1Password, KeePassXC, and the benefits of strong, unique passwords is really why you would want to use these. Bitwarden is very nice. It's open source. It's very popular. It does also have an excellent free version. LastPass, I think, used to be very good. I think with their local attacks that they've had at the, recent times, I think there is a problem with it. KeePass is local, which is nice. Nothing gets stored in the cloud. And this is very good for researchers who prefer maximum control. But these are just some of the password managers that we can use. And this is one of the ways that, we can, as researchers prevent us from trying to think of new passwords every day because, you know, it's nothing really random when you try and think of a password, is it? Now, a next tool that we can use is what we call multi-factor authentication. Now, all of us are aware of this. If somebody stole your password today, because that's a reality, what would stop them from logging into your account? And for most of us, it's multi-factor authentication. If you don't have that multi-factor authentication, it's a problem. So I want you to understand, first and foremost, passwords can be stolen. Multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication is a way of adding an extra layer of security to your information. Now, authentication factors usually fall into three different categories, right? When I ask you to authenticate yourself, it is something that you have, right? Maybe it's a phone or an authenticator app. It's something that you are, whether that's a fingerprint or a face recognition or biometrics. And the last category, it is something that you are, right? Sorry, it's something that you something that you know. Something that you know would be like a password, a PIN, or a passphrase. So for multi-factor authentication speaks about something that you know, something that you have, and something that you are. And then if you have all three of those enabled, you know that you have good security. So if you look at your passwords right now and you say, okay, I log into Google, I just log in with the password, that's something that you know. Cool, one's done. Something that you have, an authenticator app. If it doesn't send you some type of two-factor authentic or some type of OTP, okay, that's a problem, right? It should be sending you OTP. Something that you are, maybe you need to use a fingerprint to access the OTP, right? Or face recognition to access your OTP. So that really is what enables us to have good security. You know, where step one, so in order for us to understand this is now we know what multi-factor authentication is, right? Why we should use it, how you can use it using your different authenticator apps. And then on the institutional level, you have noticed that UJ now has this, authenticator app with OneDrive for students and for academic staff, and they force you to authenticate now every time you enter a password. So previously, those of you who had to change your password for your email addresses, you would have changed it. Now they're forcing you to change it, and then you must enter a code, or you must go to the authenticator app and do it. So multi-factor authentication assumes that passwords will be stolen eventually or compromised. And this allows us to prevent that from happening in terms of somebody still getting access to our accounts. All right. So the next kind of thing that I want to talk about is the next kind of technique that you can apply to keep your information safe is what we call full disk encryption. Now, what happens if your laptop is stolen, ladies and gentlemen? Most people will think, I'll change my password, but your laptop's gone, right? By the time you change your laptop's already gone. It's already been scraped for all the information. And this is arguably one of the biggest takeaways that I think you guys can take from today's workshop in terms of what you should have enabled at a bare minimum on your research machines or your research devices. You should have what we call full disk encryption. Now, what this means is that if you look on your file manager right now, all your files are visible, right? You log onto your computer and you put your information in, your files are visible. Now, say for example, somebody opened your computer, they stolen your laptop, they try and log onto your laptop, and they successfully guess the password. They would have access to all your information, correct? Now, as it stands, those files on your machine are not encrypted. That hard drive, say for example, they don't know your password to get into your machine. They can remove that hard drive from your computer, place it into another computer, and access your files. So the hard drive on your computer where the files are physically stored is not protected. And that's very important for you to understand. The actual files on your machine are not protected. Somebody can easily just remove it, take it out, and then once they take it out, put it in another computer and access that information. So we have two tools. I'll explain Windows because we have the Windows one. Is Windows uses what we call BitLocker, right? And I'll try and see if I can, bring it up here. That's so if you just do a Windows search, right, and you go BitLocker. Now I've put it off for the sake of this demonstration, but BitLocker is to help protect your files and folders from unauthorized access by protecting your drives with BitLocker. So you'll see the operating system. I have my C drive. I have BitLocker turned off. Now, what this basically means is that if I remove my hard drive from my machine, this means that this hard drive is accessible. So what we should all be doing is we should be turning on BitLocker, and then it will pop up with a window like this. Excuse me. Now it says, how do you want to back up your recovery key? What this is, remember the key is something that is a recovery key is used to access the files and folders if you are having problems at unlocking your PC. So it's a good idea to have more than one and keep each of these in a safe place other than just your computer. So maybe a little USB that you keep in a safe, or maybe on a piece of paper that you've kept locked up in the safe, and you can basically select a specific option like save to file. I could then choose a specific location on my file to save this to, and then that recovery key would be saved. I'm not going to do this now because it's a few steps to go into, but you would then just save the file, you would go next, and then you would be asked to choose a PIN, right? And this PIN would be used to unlock your hard drive every time. So BitLocker is one of the things that everybody that is sitting here at the end of this presentation should go and implement themselves. Okay, so that is BitLocker. For Mac systems, you have what we call FireVault, which you can use. All right, so that is BitLocker, and that is what we call full-on full disk encryption. So this is BitLocker. So I've already showed you this, how to enable BitLocker, your recovery keys, practical demonstration, which I've already showed you. So you do have what we call encrypting USB drives. So one of the things is how many of us actually store our data on a USB or an external drive? Because I think a lot of you, especially in like the environmental sector, you'll have like a lot of you that do genomic sequencing and stuff like that. Your files are massive, right? You could have upwards of gigabits. Even those of you who are in the data science sector, you'll have massive, massive files. So the idea here now is you would have an external drive. How many of you encrypt those external drives? Because if somebody found your external drive, are they able to access it? And if the answer is yes, that's a problem, because as we said, humans can be the biggest risks, right? So USB drives are actually one of the biggest security risks in this regard, right? And why? Because they are very portable, they are easy to lose, they're easy to steal. And the problem is that us as researchers, we frequently store things like, interviews or participant information, student information. And if that drive is essentially lost, it's a problem. So you need to encrypt these external drives. You can use BitLocker. There's an option that's just below that to say encrypt it with BitLocker, or you can just right click on the USB device and it will give you an option to encrypt it. If I don't have a USB with me right now, maybe I do. I'll try and plug it in and see. But, if you plug in a USB and you right click on that specific USB, there is the specific option for you to do it. So if let me just see if I can pull it up quickly. So if I look at the specific USB, let me just see. So I'll just share this over here. So if you see over here, this is the USB that I've just inserted. If you right click on that USB, you can turn on BitLocker for that specific USB. you can also do it this way. It just shows you a bit like the old school way. So you can see there, turn on BitLocker. If I turn on BitLocker, this option gets added over here. You would then choose a password. Password. Don't use this because that's not a very secure password. You would secure the password. You also can use a smart card. You'll need to insert your smart card for this. So a lot of us won't have access to this. But in this case, you'll just use a password, and then your thing is encrypted. You have some level of encryption and some safety, and it really, if you just remembering that one password at each instance, it's not going to be a lot of effort there, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So let me just open my slides again. Now I've lost them. I can't see them. Okay, so if we now look at secure cloud storage, so secure cloud storage is also something that we use. Now, the problem with secure cloud storage at the moment, ladies and gentlemen, is that, as I mentioned previously, sorry, I just want to just quickly reshare my presentation because for whatever reason, it's not sharing correctly. Just give me 1 second to get back to it. Okay, if it decides to open eventually, it will get there. Okay, so we were somewhere here. All right, so if we look at cloud storage now, how many of us use OneDrive or Dropbox or Google? A lot of us use it, right? How many of you have checked your sharing permissions recently? Now, if you go to a lot of us do this, right? We would share data with our supervisors, or we would share it with our collaborators or our peers that we are doing a research study with. And a lot of you will just share a file. You say copy, link, and share. Now, the problem with that is, have you checked the permissions of that link? Because a lot of the time we would say copy link, and then the options would be anyone with this link can access it. Who's to say that the link that you send to somebody is going to be kept safe by that person? There's no guarantee of that, ladies and gentlemen. And that fundamentally is one of the biggest problems that we find ourselves in, right? So the cloud storage is great, right? It allows us to synchronize, we can collaborate, it allows us to back up, we have remote access, and there's huge advantages for us to researchers. So by all means, this is what we should be using. But the problems will usually occur because of incorrect permissions, you have public links, you share credentials, or if you forget about a folder, right? So for example, if I can try and show you again on this kind of, I'll just quickly try and show you an example without compromising my data here. So if I go, for example, and I show you, this is my working directory, and I say, for example, I have funding applications over here, and I say I want to share this. Now, okay, well, obviously this is not on Dropbox, but on OneDrive, if I copy the link, right, and I share that link with anybody, that's a problem. Now, OneDrive, luckily, is people with existing access can use this link. So if I haven't shared this folder with you and you're not within my university or my institution, it's a problem. But Dropbox and other tools like that, where Dropbox, Google, you can just copy the link and share it. Now, if you share that link with somebody, that's a problem, right? Because that person would be able to access it, and anybody with that information would be able to access it. The problem that we also have with institutional accounts is that you will create an account and you might create a public repository where everybody can have access to that within the institution. And that in itself, ladies and gentlemen, can be a very big concern that we could find ourselves in. So people often assume, that it's a cloud, therefore it's secure, and that's not the case. More recently, I have a case where somebody that works in cybersecurity had their Dropbox compromised. Their Dropbox account was stolen. They downloaded all of their files. They deleted the files, and then the specific person didn't have access to their files. And then when I looked at the specific login details, it turns out that there was this external link that this person clicked and they gained access to their Dropbox credentials and they just simply logged in. So cloud storage is great, but don't make it use of a primary storage. Do not think that you have cloud and that's it. Cloud storage can be used as a primary, but you should have a backup of it. And to that point, we need to make sure that we are backing up our information. So how do we safeguard data? And we're winding down towards, the more of the importance of how do we save things, right? So what is the easiest way to share a file? Most people will answer email, right? So is it the safest? No, it's not. So don't email somebody a very sensitive data set. Don't do it. It's not the right way to do it. Researchers collaborate constantly. So the challenge is sharing information without exposing it. And the common mistakes that people will make is that you'll email sensitive information, you will share participant information, you'll use personal cloud accounts instead of institutional ones, you will share files with incorrect permissions, you will usually you don't. I'm not saying that you will do that with the malicious intent. We don't do things with malicious intent, or some of us. There are attackers out there that do. But even in the internet was not invented with malicious intent. Nobody woke up and said, I'm going to build the internet with the purpose of stealing information. No. But the fact is, people are malicious. And because things were not built with the malicious intent in mind, they were not built with the correct security safeguards. And that has left us at a disadvantage before the game has even started, right? So, use institutional platforms and control permission very carefully. Okay, what are some of the other things you do? As I mentioned, backups and recovery are very, very important. Imagine I walk into your office tomorrow morning and tell you your laptop and your hard drive has completely failed. I didn't warn you. I didn't tell you it's going to go down tomorrow. I just came and told you your laptop failed. How many of you would burst into tears? A lot of us here, right? Because let's face it, our research is very important to us, right? And many researchers focus entirely on preventing unauthorized access, but there is such a thing of loss, and natural disasters happen. Getting hit by electricity, your data set or your hard drive being completely fried. Cybersecurity is not only about stopping attackers, ladies and gentlemen. It's also about ensuring your work remains available when you need it. So, encryption will protect us against theft, unauthorized access, data exposure, but backups will protect us against hardware failure, human error, ransomware, accidental deletion. So one of the strategies we can use is the 3-2-1 backup strategy, where this is probably the most useful backup strategy where researchers can remember. So you have 3 copies. You have an original copy, backup number 1, and backup number 2. That is the 3-2-1 strategy. So maybe the original copy is on the cloud, the secondary copy is on your local machine, and the third copy is on the external hard drive. Then you are sufficiently covered. And ladies and gentlemen, don't be ignorant to the fact that you don't think it'll ever happen to you, because it can and it will. We think that we sit here and we are not going to be targeted. Nobody's going to want to steal my data. It's not that important. If you think that, you are naive. You need to understand that you are vulnerable, and if you don't take the correct mechanisms to keep secure, you are going to be compromised, right? So that is some of the different types of backup strategies that we have. Then we have ransomware and malware. Now, the question that I've been waiting to ask you is, what would you do? So say, for example, you've just done your entire thesis and you've just done your entire, thesis, you've got your master's, maybe it's your honors year project, maybe it's your 3rd year study notes, whatever it is. You've got all this information and you are just about to submit your thesis or your master's dissertation, or your PhD thesis, or your master's thesis and your dissertation. What would you do? Or now you're just about to sit up, paint this picture, and somebody comes along and steals your laptop. What would you do? would you fight for the laptop? I think there was some years ago, there was a student, I don't know if it was from Wits or UP, but there was somebody trying to steal her laptop, and she fought the robbers off. She physically fought them off and didn't allow it. And when they interviewed her, they asked her, why didn't you just let it go? It's not worth your life. And she says, if you understand what I had to go through to do this work, you understand why I was not willing to give it up. So how many of you sitting over here would fight for your research? How many of you here would pay to get your research back? Imagine you did your entire PhD and the day you're about to submit, somebody steals it. And that's the only copy you have. How many of you would pay for it? Would you pay for it? Yes. I mean, I know I would pay for it because fundamentally, we are not able to put, as researchers, there's no real way for you to put price on your time. You know the trials and tribulations you as a researcher had to go through to get to that work, right? So you would pay for your research back, right? So what is ransomware and what is malware? Very simply, ransomware and malware is a type of thing that goes onto your computer and locks it. So you cannot access your information. Your information is still there, but they access it. Now, all your information is inaccessible, your thesis, your research data, and then you get a message from this person to say, if you want your files back, pay us 5,000 Rand, we'll give it back. Do you think they're going to give your files back? Yes, they will. It's like this. What good is a thief if they're not reputable? In the sense that if he doesn't or she doesn't sell you or give your information back, the next person they do it to, they're not gonna, the person will be like, oh, you're not gonna give my information back. So ransomware attackers will give you information back if you pay it. It's ironic, it's funny, but they will give it to you. In most cases, in some cases they are known not to, but they will give it to you in most cases because they do it on such large scales. They just have like automatic scripting that allows them to do these things. But a lot of us would pay for it. So if you hold a ransom, if you have a backup of information, it's fine. Keep my information. It's fine. You can delete it. You can do whatever you need to do, depending on how sensitive it is. I have a backup, right? So in order for us to prevent ransomware, have backups. Install your software updates. I hate it just as much as you do when Windows pops up at the most inconvenient time. Please update now. But those updates are put there because Windows has realized there's a security vulnerability in their system. And if you do not update your system, you are vulnerable to that security breach. Right? So updates are so important, and recognize efficient attempts, recognizing when somebody is trying to steal information. One of the other things I want to mention here, ladies and gentlemen, is ethics and data protection, right? When participants agree to take part in your study, what are they trusting you with? I want you to think about you being on the other side. Somebody's interviewing you. They interview you. You give them your whole life story, where you grew up, your family information, your ID numbers, your income that you make. What do you expect? You expect them to keep that safe. You give Facebook all your information. You give Instagram all your information. You give TikTok all your information. You expect them to keep it safe, correct? So you as a researcher have a big responsibility to keep other people's information safe. You have a responsibility and an ethical responsibility to safeguard that participant information. So you need to think about POPIA. And the university, in reality, ladies and gentlemen, is clamping down on POPIA compliance, right? There's an ethical obligation for you to make sure that it's kept safe. Confidentiality and participation information must be explicitly kept safe, and you need to have some type of institutional compliance. So one of the mistakes that we make as researchers, how many people think they have never made a mistake, a cybersecurity mistake? None of us should be putting up our hands because, myself included, we've all made cybersecurity mistakes. And most security incidences occur because of an ordinary habit rather than some malicious. Ordinarily, you just take your USB out and you put it on your desk. Or you open your office door and you quickly go out to the bathroom and you don't lock it. We do these mistakes because it's a habit. So some of the mistakes is using personal emails for research data, storing some type of sensitive information in unencrypted data, weak passwords, you don't have backups, and you don't share files correctly. And I think we've covered all of these quite a bit. I know I'm running out of time, so I don't want to go on too long. So what is a practical checklist? So what I want to do before we go on to the demonstrations and all that is there's this practical checklist I want you to look at. How many of you have enabled full disk encryption? How many of you use multi-factor authentication? How many of you use password managers? Who uses encryption backups? Who here keeps their software up to date? And how many of you lock devices when unattended? Now, if you put your hand up for about 2 of those, that is not good. That is not good enough, right? Think about personal health. Think about your health, right? And it's like this. No, when you exercise, right? You exercise, you sleep, you eat well, you hydrate. If you sleep well, but you don't exercise and you don't drink enough water, are you healthy? No. If you drink water, but you don't exercise, are you healthy? No. So all of these things is if you use one, but you don't use them together, that doesn't mean you're secure. If you encrypt your disk, but you don't use multi-factor authentication, that doesn't mean that your data is completely secure. So the idea is we need to be using all of these together. And, by the end of this presentation, I want you to internally go look and see what do you do to make sure that you are practically kept safe. Then there are some types of discussion that I wanted to have. But before we get to the discussion, and depending on the time that we have, we'll come back to this. What I would like to demonstrate, just a few things that I'd like to demonstrate to you, ladies and gentlemen, is some of these different types of websites, just some online tools that you can kind of look just to see, like, from just from an awareness point of view, just for you to see how secure you potentially are. I'm just trying to open them. Just give me some second. Give me a second or two. Okay, so that should be fine. All right. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. All right, so these are just some websites, and the idea behind this is just to showcase to you some of the different types of tools that we have. So this site is called Have I Been Pwned. You can just copy the link over here, and the idea over here is that it looks to see whether you have been compromised. So, for example, I'll put in my email address. Right, if you want to put in your email address, you're more than welcome to. We can check it together. But I put this email address in, and you can see there's no data breaches. I don't have any other email addresses over here that I can potentially try, but maybe we can try, I don't know, let's just try random ones. Tom, I'm pretty sure there is a Tom out there, and there is a Gmail account associated with Tom, I would assume so. Okay, let's check. Okay, so tom@gmail.com. If you have tom@gmail.com, I'm sorry, 306 data breaches. Obviously, this, because Tom is such a common name, I would imagine. But what's really cool now, it gives you a breakdown, and it says, okay, in 2026, Charter. In 2026, the telecommunication company Charter Communications, the parent company, a consumer of broadband and cable brand Spectrum, was named, blah, blah. The group later published data which exposed 4.9 million unique email addresses, along with the names, phone numbers, and physical addresses. A subset, so they have your phone number, they have your physical address. So a subset of names, a subset of approximately 85,000 records originating from internal employee directories, also included job titles. So can you now see, this is all the information that was compromised. If I'm an attacker and I get this data on the dark web, right? Because I could get this somewhere, because people post data leakages, right? The point of data leakage is they say, pay us money or we'll leak this data. Companies pay the money. If they don't, they leak the data. People can access the data. If I'm an attacker, I can scrape for this data and I can see, okay, Tom's email has been compromised. I can get his job title. I can get his name. I can get his phone number, his address. I can even get his date of birth from this one. I can get his gender. I can get his government issued ID. Can you see how I can do some type of identity theft now as an attacker, right? And the reason I'm showing you this with regards to encryption, not really with regards to encryption, but more from a data security standpoint, making sure that you are data aware or security aware of what's out there. Then from a security password, this is security.org. This is just a password that we can check. So password 123. It would take about 41 years to crack your password. It's not a very secure password, to be honest with you, but let's try and make some random characters. I've just put random characters, and you can see the longer the password gets, 100 spatillion, I don't even know how to quantify that, years to crack this password. Now, this is talking about brute force, right? And the password that I typed was just some random jargon. I mean, if I show you what I typed, let me just show you what I typed. If it was some random jargon, I mean, that's not what I typed. Okay, well, let me just show it to you this way then. So if you just did something like this, a random jargon, that's essentially what we can put in there. And then you can see how long it will take to crack that specific password. So the longer the password, the better for sure. And this just shows you how secure your password is. But if I just do this, like 1, 2, 3, 24 nanoseconds, right? So not very easy. And also, this doesn't check easy to guess passwords. It's just checking from a pure brute force point of view how we would be able to do that. This is called Google Phishing Quiz, and I think all of you should try and do this. It's basically a quiz where you take to see if you can identify different types of phishing. So as a researcher, I think this is very important for you to try and do, right? We don't have the time to do it. I did want to try and do it today, but you would just basically enter your name, your email address, you get started. Maybe we can just quickly just try start with it at least, just so that I can show you how it basically looks. So it will show you like this is a document. Luke Johnson shared this document. Luke Johnson has invited you to edit the following document. Hey there, here is a document you asked for. Let me know if you need anything. Do we think this is legitimate or do we think this is phishing? As a group, what do we think? Do we think this is phishing? Do we think this is legitimate? I don't know if you guys are able to chat, but if you are able to chat, please let me know in the chat whether you think maybe a thumbs up if you think it's legitimate, a thumbs down, or a lack of response if you think it's a phishing attack, right? So I can't really see any interaction, but I think, from my perspective, this definitely looks like phishing. Why do I think it's phishing? Well, they say, hey there, right? Typically, Google will send hey to your name, and they will send you the specific file. Luke Johnson has invited you to edit this thing. This email address looks suspicious. Even if it was legitimate, I would still say this is phishing. And then it says correct. And then it says, okay, how do we know that this is phishing? So mousing over this link or using a long press will show you that it goes to an insecure imitation drive. So, okay, cool. Then it says a free blender is a pretty good survey incentive. A brand new blender. You have been chosen to participate in our loyalty program. So if I hover over this link, I don't know, let's say inspect this link over here, get started. So if we go over here, we should be able to see the link itself, www.galantic. So that doesn't look very legitimate to me. I would say that's phishing. I was correct. And then if you say, show me, the email claims to be from Coca-Cola. Okay, but look at this email address. Very super suspicious. Right? You can also see the content, even the text is all in the image. While in some legitimate communication, the technique is to avoid detection, and the link itself was avoid. Let's do one more together. So, hey, again, look at the address, the service@paypal.com. Not really the most obvious one, but when somebody bills you, they'll always give you the information, right? They always say who they're addressing this to. So invoice details, again, amount request $600. We don't work in dollars. They will convert that currency for you. There's evidence. They have an invoice number. There's no attachments. The fact that they want you to view and pay more, you can see at the bottom over here where the link is. So it does look to a certain degree like as best. It's probably one of the more harder ones to detect. But for me, the fact that they haven't addressed my name and they're giving me in a dollar amount, I would say it's phishing. And then you can see the message actually note from the seller. There we go. Well, that's a good way to tell. So this is quite a nice tool you can use. This is Warden, which I've talked about. So this is the idea behind the password generator. So you could just say, include all of these things, generate a password for me, and then it generates all these passwords for you. If you have an account with them, then they store that password for you, so you don't have to remember it for the next time. And then the last one is just an encryption technique to show you, how text would look when it's encrypted. And then you can use different types of encryption techniques. And the idea would be that if you take this over here and you put it on this side and you decode it, you would need to have the key, obviously, to decode it. But this is just a nice tool for you to kind of see how you would encrypt and decrypt. Unfortunately, that's my time that is up, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you very much for today's presentation. If you have any questions, happy to answer it. Hopefully you have learned something from this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc, for your wonderful presentation. I actually have a question of my own, which does and does not relate to the topic in a way. So I've had, so I have Instagram, as I'm sure most people do. And I've used a password that has nothing related to any personal information of mine, but still got hacked into.
Okay.
How does a person do that per se?
So there's a few ways one could do it. Have you used the password on different websites, or is it only for that website that you used it from?
No, it was specifically just for that.
So there's different ways of mining different types of passwords, right? So what could have happened is this person could have tried to enter a username, say forgot password, and then entered through your email account, right, to get that OTP. And maybe it's an email account that you don't monitor. So Instagram's at back then the recovery modes weren't very good. So that's one of the ways. They could have also intercepted the traffic, that when you entered your login details, they could have intercepted it. Yes, the password is hashed and it is encrypted, but you can have ways of decrypting that information. So there's multiple ways they could have done that. Unfortunately, in that instance, I mean, there are even ways where I've had, for example, on my gaming device where I'll get random OTP sent from me because somebody's trying to access it and they're getting the password correctly, and that's a dedicated password that they use for that. So there are different ways, whether that's been they try to recover it, whether they use it from a different account, whether that they try to intercept it. They can even monitor your network traffic. They can even get you to log on to a fake Instagram account, mine that information, and then log in with the real information. So they would be like, oh, we've noticed this, please log in to verify your information. You log in, they scan that email, they scan that password, they then use that to log into the legitimate account. That's why having something like multi-factor authentication as a backup is definitely something that you have to have. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you so much, Doc. Yes, it has answered my question. And I see there's a hand up. If you could please unmute your microphone.
Thank you, Doc, for the wonderful presentation. If encrypted data is stored in the cloud, does that provide enough protection on its own?
Again, so this is a good question. Thank you for it. Again, no, because just because something's encrypted does not mean that it is necessarily kept safe forever, right? You can decrypt information, and I wanted to show you, but I ran out of time. But essentially, we can take a word, encrypt it, have a passphrase, and then decrypt that word with that passphrase. So if somebody has that passphrase, to decrypt that information with your key, that information is compromised. So somebody can steal your key. Great. After they steal your key, they can then try and unlock that information, but it's got a passphrase. If they now have the passphrase, they will be able to decrypt that information. So having encrypted cloud storage data does not mean it's guaranteed to be safe, but having it encrypted in the first place is still a good starting point. So to answer your question, no, it doesn't mean it's safe, but it is safer than unencrypted data. Okay.
Thank you so much, Doc. If your question has been answered, okay, I see you've given me a thumbs up. And I see there's another question in the chat. Apologies if I put Nakokutemwa Mapala. Hey Doc, how often would you suggest I change passwords for serious accounts, regardless of whether or not I have been involved in a data breach?
That's a great question, and I think it's such a difficult thing. And I remember I talked about this security and convenience trade-off. Fundamentally, ladies and gentlemen, the more secure you are, the less convenient. I mean, for you to now change a password every week, that's going to be super inconvenient. Nobody wants to be doing that, right? But common practice is every month, right? So institutional they'll make their employees change passwords on the email accounts across all devices every month, just to make sure that it's safe. So I would say a month-to-month password for critical accounts. If it's a non-critical account, I would just use a password manager and create a very long password and then have that password manager. I would change the password manager email password monthly as well. So I often tell my students, use the password manager and then have all your passwords there. Then have that one master password that you use and change that monthly, because then that's one password you remember in every month as opposed to 50 or 20 or 50. So I think hopefully that will answer your question and give you some clarity in terms of how often you should do it.
Thank you so much, Doc. Okay, I see you've indicated the thumbs up. Are there any more questions for our facilitator? If you do have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or type them in the chat box. And in the meantime, as we wait for people to ask questions, I would like to read out a few reminders for everyone. Please complete the feedback form that I have sent in the chat. It does help us a lot in terms of our bettering the workshops, and it also gives feedback to our facilitators and moderators for the sessions, which could help improve future workshops. I'd also like to remind our participants to register on RCDMS, as it is our one-stop platform where students can access all our workshops, including recordings of past sessions. You can also book free writing consultations with our writing consultants and generate your certificate of attendance once you have registered and attended the sessions via RCDMS. Should you experience any issues with RCDMS, kindly email us. I will place the email address in the chat box and we will gladly assist you with any queries. UJ Postgraduate and Postdoctoral Research Conference on the 16th of October this year for all PhD, Masters, and Honors students. Submissions are closed, but you are welcome to join us as part of our online audience. In addition, we will also be hosting a 2027 Pan-African Postgraduate and Postdoctoral Research Conference next year in Sun City, Northwest. Further communication regarding this conference will be shared with students, so please be on the lookout. And a reminder of our afternoon session titled Managing Fieldwork Assistance and Research Teams Through Coordinated Communication and Task Allocation, which will be happening from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. Doc, I don't see any hands raised or any further questions in the chat. So I think we can come to the closing of this workshop.
All right. No, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I hope that ladies and gentlemen, you've learned something and take away the importance of the encryption behind your data. Otherwise, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can get my information from the directory. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doc. But before you go, I'd like to steal a few more moments of your time. As the RCD unit, we would like to express our appreciation to the participants for being with us in today's workshop, and to you, Dr. Tevin Moodley, for your valuable insights that you have shared with us. With your permission, Doc, may I end the session, or is there anything you would like to add before we do?
No, that's it. Thank you very much. You make go ahead and end this session.
Thank you so much, Doc. I am going to stop the recording and conclude the workshop. Have a great day further, everyone. And I will be putting our RCD inquiries email into the chat box right now. So that if you have any further questions or anything that you need help with, you can contact us there and we will be sure to help you within 1 to 5 working days, depending on how busy we are. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. I'm going to stop the recording and close the workshop now.